Loved it. I love to hear that. Hopefully you weren't shaking out sand from there for the rest of the weekend, but that sounds great. Yeah, finish the project. Yeah. I was working a little bit on the project as well, just to come up with a little bit of an example to show you all. And yeah, it's tough. There's a lot going on there, right? There's a lot to do. All right, anything else fun, exciting? Right. Some folks are working, keeping your brains busy. Hey, much appreciated, right? Once you're done with the class, you'll have all the weekends back to yourself. So it's good to stay busy for sure. All right, let me see if I can. It looks like you're still sharing your screen. Do you mind if I share screen? Wait, I see. Okay, cool. Oh, Tatiana's doing some training. Exciting. That's great. We have a very a little like home gym, quote unquote. So I'll try and keep up with you, Tatiana, as best I can. Yeah, I can increase the volume. Yeah, let me change my input. Thanks for sharing. Let's see here. I think I might need to stop sharing here. One sec. All right, cool. Is this any better sound-wise? Hello, hello. Testing 1, 2, 3. No. All right, we got it good from Veronica. That's exciting. Um, for folks saying no, I would say, can you just let me know if you are able to turn up the sound a little bit? I'll promise I'll try and stay consistent at the very least. And how about this? This is some slight manual adjusting. I just don't want to be shouting it in everyone's ears. All right, it sounds like for most folks, it's okay. Just keep letting me know if I do tend to talk quiet, which actually is nice for me working remote. But sometimes I can be a little bit too soft. So keep letting me know. Much appreciated. All right, let me get back to sharing over here. All right, so today we're talking about user input. I'm excited about this. This means we're going to start to move away from just learning syntax to actually be able to build some more robust applications. It's been exciting so far. I mean, I hope you all have found JavaScript at least interesting, but we've mostly been kind of like poking around the edges of it, right? Just kind of learning a bit of how to write it, how to run it. That's been good. We want to make sure we feel comfortable with that. But today we're going to start to dive a bit deeper into actually being able to interact with our users so we can move away from just building simple, exciting sort of websites that are essentially posters, right? To something a bit more interactive that can actually use user input to perform some kind of calculation, some kind of change to the web application. So our goals for today, by the end of this lesson, we're hoping you'll be able to capture user input using various methods, including dialog boxes. You all will probably recognize these from some websites. And we're going to use what's called a library called prompt sync. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a bit. And then we're going to convert user input between different data types, such as from strings to numbers or Booleans, to facilitate accurate data processing. Accurate data processing doesn't sound too exciting, but I promise it's actually quite neat once we get into it. I do like just pulling up the sort of schedule over here as well. It just helps sort of orient us on where we're heading. So we have a couple of warm-up questions. We'll dive into user input. That's where we'll spend a good chunk of time. And then we'll talk about this data type conversion. Remember, we learned about 5 different data types last week. And we'll talk about how to switch between those data types more intentionally and sort of accidentally, which is what we kind of did a bit last week. Finally, we'll have a lab, and I'll do my best to make sure we have a good amount of time in the lab. Lab's pretty fun, and there's a lot of room for creativity there. So we'll try and make sure you all have a good chunk of time at the end to work on that, and we'll go over it. that is the plan for today. All right, so let's get started with a couple warm-ups. So given the following code, I'll give you all a minute or so to work through this. What are going to be the values of C, D, E, and F? Give you all a second to look through these. Go ahead and type out your answers in the chat. All right, we got some answers coming in. Let's see a couple more before we move on. All right, excellent, y'all crushing it. Yeah, sweet. All right, so we're looking at some pretty correct answers here. So in this case, right, this example is not talking about any sort of swapping around of values, right? We did that last week, but in this case, it's pretty straightforward. We're defining two variables at the top using the let keyword, A and B. A is equal to 10. That's a number. Remember, that's our data type for this. And B is equal to 5. That's also our number, right? Equal for this. And then C, D, E, and F are going to all use the different arithmetic operators to go ahead and work with those numbers in some ways. So we have our answer down here. We got the first value here of C is 15. That's because we're adding 10 plus 5. D is going to be 5. There we have 10 minus 5. Next one's going to be 50. That's 10 times 5. That's what the asterisk is. And then finally, 10 divided by 5, that's going to give us 2. So just sort of highlight some of those keywords there again. I should say maybe language. So we have the let keyword. That's our keyword that we're using to define our variables. We have our equal sign, which is our assignment operator. That's going to assign whatever is to the right to our variable, which is to the left. We have 10 and 5, which are numbers, right? That's a data type that we have in JavaScript. And each of these expressions, that's some block of code that's going to evaluate to something. These are plus, minus, multiplication, and division operators, those symbols, to go ahead and perform operations on those numbers. So lots of language around here. It's helpful, I think, to try and drill down into the exact terminology. On the other hand, it feels pretty straightforward, right? We define a couple things, and then we use them using our regular math operators. All right, excellent. Let me actually just cover one more thing here too. Remember, we learned you can always run code in the console. So if you ever need to just try something out, you can always just copy and paste that down here. If we run it, we can then print out any of these values and check out what we get. So don't forget that is available to you as well. All right, let's do this next one. So remember, we also talked about last week precedence and sort of the order of operations. So what is result? And go ahead and explain why result has that value considering operator precedence. If you want to think about it, go ahead and type it out in our chat, and then we'll chat about it. All right. Excellent. Folks coming up with the right answer here. Appreciate the descriptions coming in as well. Yeah, so as you all have identified, 10 is indeed the right value here. The reason for that is that multiplication has a higher precedence than addition. It's going to get evaluated first. So that leaves us for 3 times 2 is 6. And then we're going to add that remaining 4 to it to get 10. Excellent. Not too bad. Let's do one more here. We have two values, 8 and 4. And then z, we're doing x divided by y plus 1. What's the value of z? And once again, what is the reason why z is that value? Right, excellent. Yeah, you are crushing it. All right, so as you all are identifying, so 3 is the correct value here. So both precedents in terms of division should happen for plus. And then also in general, remember JavaScript will read from left to right. And so in this case, the entire expression will be evaluated, but it's, both of those are in its favor of dividing x by y first. So we end up with 8 divided by 4, that's 2, and then we're going to add 1 to that. All right, excellent. Yeah, we had to add a couple taxes to that. I hear you talking about it. All right, so that's what we discussed from last week. Let's talk a little bit more about the topic we're going to talk about today, user input. So this is just a thought question. There's not necessarily a right answer here. Why do y'all think it's important to consider user input when designing a website or some kind of web application? How does that impact the user experience? So what do you all think? Why is it important to consider user input when designing a website or application? I'll throw out another question as well. What's a website you all visited that doesn't have any user interaction? Can you all think of any? All right, so we have a response here from Sartasha. Ensures the product meets user needs. Yes, when we have user inputs, right, depending on what a web application can do, that allows us to better meet user needs by, for example, taking in their name, taking in their email, taking in their preferences in some way. What else? Why else might user input be important? Yeah, not too sure. So I'll add this. I think particularly now, a lot. For me, it's hard to think of a website I visit that doesn't have any user interaction. I would say just about every website now has some kind of user interaction, even if it's just sort of clicking through on links, being able to comment, being able to like something, being able to sign up and log in, right? There's all kinds of user interactions we sort of consider now default. But if you can remember, back in the early days of the web, a lot of websites were just that. They were just websites, and they were essentially posters for businesses, for fan websites, stuff like that. I remember back in the old days, it's going to date me slightly, but I was playing around with GeoCities or Homestead or Angelfire, if that connects for any other old people out there like myself. We were just building sort of fun little personal websites, right? There wasn't really any interaction. You might see a contact form or something like that, but that was sort of the extent of a lot of interaction. Now, everything, we're constantly interacting, providing our preferences, being able to navigate around on web applications in a way that allows us to more quickly access the content that we need. Of course, one of the, there's many benefits to being able to work with users and taking their input. Users are also the best bug testers and bug introducers of any of our web applications. Having to anticipate what users will do is quite challenging. So this next question here, how can incorrect or unexpected user input lead to errors in a program? Can you think of an example where this might happen? And the little image up here shows a little prompt dialogue, and here it's saying, how old are you? So what do y'all think? What are some ways in which user input can actually cause some problems or some issues with web applications? Aaron is saying with the data input order, so maybe if there's data that needs to get inputted, users might not do that in the correct sequence, for sure. Oh, a perfect example. Yeah, so we have month, day, year versus day, month, year, for sure, absolutely. All right, wrong type of data used. Yeah, so this is kind of what this image up here sort of alluding to. It's saying how old are you, but we just see a big input box. So I could type my age in terms of actually putting integers. I could also type my age with words. I could also just say hello and press enter, right? So there's not a lot of guardrails here, for sure. Anything else you all can think of in terms of leading to errors and kind of user input? Sure, okay. I'll say as well, so when we think of user input, I want to broaden sort of the scope of what that means from certainly a text box like this, that would be considered user input. even though things like clicking on a button, that's also user input. It could even be user input to like hover over or drag different elements of the screen, right? User input is actually quite broad. How we'll deal with it today will be via text and sort of typing in to sort of kind of prompt. But when you think about user input, that's really any kind of interaction that a user can have with the website. So of course it includes text, but it's not exclusive to forms and text. All right, excellent, y'all. Let's keep it moving. So we're talking about user input a bunch. We'll just do a brief little definition here. So user input is any information that users provide to a program, typically through various forms of interaction, such as typing on a keyboard, clicking with a mouse, or touching a screen. It allows programs to respond to the user, making them dynamic and responsive. It's a primary method for collecting data from users, which can then be used to make decisions, perform calculations, or store information. So I'll add to, if we just think of like one web application, actually, maybe I can, well, yeah, I'll pull it up. I guess I don't care if you all look at the music I'm listening to. So pull up something like Spotify, right? Do any of you all use Spotify? Is that a thing you use in some capacity? Let's see what people are saying. Yeah, Apple Music. All right, old school. I like it. Excellent. All right, so I'll just pull over just the interface here for Spotify a little bit. I have a nice little playlist here. Lo-fi coffee shop. This is like anytime I'm trying to work on something, I can only listen to lo-fi music. It's a curse. So we can see there's actually a lot of places to interact with this application. So I know you all probably think about this as maybe like a desktop application or a mobile application. There's also, of course, a web application version of this as well. What do y'all think? What are some things that as a user I can interact with here? What are some things that we can see just visually on the page? There's a ton. So there's not going to be a wrong answer here for sure. Yeah, of course, I can click the play button, right? We have a couple different places to play that. That'll play my music. That's pretty important. It's one of the key features of this application. We have playlists over here, right? So I can swap through playlists. Yeah, for sure. We can toggle around with the volume. Yeah, for sure. That'll definitely change our user experience here. Search, yes, we can actually search for something. Looking around up here, we got window mode. The artist name, take you to the artist page. Perfect. Yes, there's lots of links here. We can see those links show up as we click on this, right? And so this is, a pretty normal part of working with the web is creating different links for things. And as we click on those, different parts of the page might change, show up. Folks are showing custom order, repeat. Yeah, so we have these buttons down here to influence what our interaction is like with the music. And then we also have a way to change the order over here as well. So a couple of different options for this. We also have a couple different search bars. We have search more generally and search within the playlist. We got some options right here of all kinds of different stuff we can do with this. Right, there's so many different ways we can interact with this one little screen. Notice as well, we have all these different little X buttons up here to close. Right, that changes what the view is overall. So lots of ways to interact with any kind of web application, particularly nowadays. All right, so let me get out of Spotify. What if the entire time I was just listening to chill music while I was teaching? That'd be very calming for me, I suppose. All right, so there's a couple different ways in JavaScript that we can get user input. So there's two different environments we're talking about here. And so I'll talk through them, then I do want to spend just a moment talking about the different environments. So the ones that you all may be most familiar with are things like dialog boxes. We'll see this in the next example with things like, in terms of what we're going to type into JavaScript, alert, confirm, and prompt. And we'll show some examples of that. The other way we can take in data via JavaScript, particularly for around like text, and that we're going to work with today, is we can use terminal-based JavaScript, which is uses Node.js, and we can use a library like prompt sync, which will allow us to type into our terminal and work with the data that we have coming into that. So I think our next slide in this example, yeah, let's just take a look at the example first, and then we'll talk about this, look at the example, and I'll talk about the differences a little bit. So dialog boxes are a staple in web programming for simple and direct user interaction. Let's just take a look at them so we can take a look at the differences between them. They're pretty straightforward, and I'm sure going to remind you all something. So please do follow along and get to this page. What you all should see pop up on your view as well as my view on Codio should be something like this, right? So it should say, hey, welcome to the application. Make sure to save your work regularly. This little kind of pop-up message. I'm sure you all have seen this, particularly now, it's usually an annoying way, right? It's usually in a way where it's like, hey, do you want notifications for our website or something like that? But sometimes this will pop up when you've like uploaded a file, or a lot of websites will continue to use these as a way to sort of let you know something is completed, or let you know an error or something like that. So we can click OK, and we get access to the rest of our page. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Oh my gosh, let's expand this a little bit. So this is the JavaScript code that does this. So we can see we have the word alert, we have some parentheses, and then we have something inside of that. So just let's refresh our brains here a little bit. First of all, what data type is this that I'm highlighting right here? What data type is this? Oh, just fasten the keys. Appreciate it. Yeah, so we got string here. So this is a string. There's a couple different ways we can write strings. We have our single quotations here. We could also use double quotes or our backticks. And this right here, these parentheses, does this remind you all of anything that we learned last week? Does this feel familiar to anything else that was using parentheses that we could put stuff inside? What do you all think? Is there any pattern recognition here? This might have stumped y'all. All right, that's all right. So if you remember from last week, we had console log, and we would put strings or other data types within those parentheses inside of console log to actually print out to our terminal, right? So what we're looking at here, and we haven't talked about how to define or create them just yet, but we're looking at functions. So these are built-in functions into JavaScript. What JavaScript does is it accepts an argument, and then it's going to do something with that argument. The argument is whatever is between those parentheses. So in the case of console log, whatever text comes in here, that's what gets printed to the screen. And for alert, whatever text goes inside of there is going to show up in the alert box. So again, if I refresh this little index page, very exciting HTML page over here. As we refresh it, we should see this text show up. And this, of course, is the text that's occurring inside of alert. So that is how all those things connect to one another. Right, excellent. I think that's most of what's happening here. Yeah, okay, well, let's take a look at this example here as well. All right, so one thing we talked about last week as well was the return value of something. We talked about expressions getting evaluated, being able to access those values. Here's another example of it. So we're going to continue to I'm going to try and continue to use these words of like expression, assigning values, and return values, just try and drive that home. So if we assign the return value of alert, that function call, that expression, to a variable and print it out, in this case, so I'll go ahead and refresh here, we see the alert does run, right? We would want that to happen. That's what we would expect. And we try and print out that value. We get a whole bunch of sort of nonsense here. I think this should actually be something slightly different here, but that's kind of interesting. Error. Oh, I wonder actually, okay, well, we'll leave it there. Essentially, there's not going to be a return value from alert that we're going to be able to use appropriately to make any kind of important change here. Let's take a look at the next example where we will be able to use it. All right, so in the next example here, we're talking about confirm. So confirm is very similar, but you can see the prompt here is a little bit different. We have cancel and OK. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And when we log out, the return value confirm, we get true. So let me run through that one more time here. I'll just try and expand this out a little bit so you all can see all the text in here. So I'll refresh it. So again, we have this prompt that shows up, this is the text that is within that confirmed function, within those parentheses. If we hit OK, we're going to get a returned value from confirm. That value is stored inside of user confirmation, and we log out user confirmation, and we have true over here. So I want y'all to take a guess. I'm going to refresh this. This is what happened when I hit OK. What do y'all think is going to happen when I hit cancel? Tragish is on it. You're anticipating my questions quickly. Yeah. Any other guesses here? So one guess for false, and next year test it out. Yeah. All right. Let's try it. So if we hit cancel here, we'll see the value we get is false. This is pretty useful, right? So now we have a confirmation, and now that we have that value, we can start to write code based on that value. So as we're going to learn about moving forward, we'll actually be able to like transition to say, hey, if the user said okay, then do XYZ. If they didn't, they said cancel, then do ABC, right? Do something a little bit different. This is already increasing the amount of user interaction we're getting. That first example of alert was really just something that the user has to interact with to continue. Our confirm is actually giving us some data from the user, even if it's just a Boolean, even if it's just yes, no. All right, let's take a look at that next dialog prompt we have here. All right, this one's a little bit cooler. Here, we get something where instead of just an OK or cancel, we go ahead and get a text box that actually has a place where we can type something in. So this one is asking us a question. It's saying, please enter your name. So I'm going to go and enter my name here. I'll hit OK. Then you can see on the right over here, it actually is able to take that value and do something with it. All right, now we're cooking, right? Now we're actually getting data from our user and are able to change and modify the output based on that. This is pretty powerful. So let's take a look at the JavaScript code for that. It's very similar, of course. This time we're using the prompt function. So we started with alert, then we did confirm. Now we're at prompt. What prompt is going to do is it's going to take this text, this string that's within the prompt function that is passed in as an argument. That's what will be within that dialog box. And then prompt will always just give you some text field to enter in. That's its only job. If the user hits OK, that return value, whatever the text is inside of there, will get assigned to the variable that you want to set it to. In this case, it'll be assigned to username. And then we can go ahead and use that value overall. So pretty neat, right? Let's go ahead and refresh and see a couple other examples here. So if I just hit OK, notice there's no like validation checking, right? In this case, I just hit OK, I didn't type anything in. So it says, hello, exclamation point, right? So not perfect. If I refresh it here one more time and hit cancel, you'll see that the return value that comes back is null, right? So that means they didn't do anything purposefully, right? So we now have a few different values that could come in here that we need to account for when we're using a prompt. All right, so those are our three dialog options. So if you are writing JavaScript within sort of the confines of HTML and CSS, right, you can use these immediately. These are built into the JavaScript language. Now we're going to transition a bit to talk about how we can get input via the JavaScript terminal. So let me read through this, and then I'll talk a little bit about the different environments that we have. So in terminal-based JavaScript applications, remember that's where we've had a terminal on the right-hand side. We've been able to type into, but really we've been just using the run code button. That's where we're talking about the terminal. We don't have access in the terminal to the browser's prompt function for user input. Instead, we can use a library called prompt sync to achieve similar functionality. We have pre-configured the prompt sync library in Codio for your convenience, so no additional installation is required. To use the library in your program, we're going to include the following import statement at the beginning of your JavaScript file that looks like this. I know this looks probably wild to y'all. Don't just hold on with me for one moment. Just something to note, you all do not need to memorize this or try and like wrap your head around this too much. We'll talk about what this does a little bit in a moment, but also this is something that we can always look up and pull in. And then here's an example of how we're going to use it. It's actually going to feel very similar to what we just looked at. So for example, prompt, what is your name? And then we'll have a console log and we can use that return value. So it'll work very similar, but it's going to give us access to prompt in a different environment. Excellent. All right, so let me move over here. So you'll notice what's something that's different on the right-hand side from what we're looking at versus what we were looking at earlier in our lesson. There's not just a blank page here. Notice there's no refresh. That's because we're not looking at an HTML page. We're looking at the terminal, right? So we're working in the terminal now. So I'm talking about a couple of different environments. This is what I was talking about. So with JavaScript, and actually if you all happened to watch that video that was, I want to say maybe the first lesson is on the history of JavaScript. You might have, this might come back to you a little bit. JavaScript initially was just built for the browser. So just what you all have been working with HTML and CSS, just in the browser and built as a way to be, enable user interaction with websites. JavaScript has done great doing that, but now in the past, but maybe in the somewhat recent past, we've gotten access to run JavaScript in a terminal, so on a machine that doesn't require a browser, through a tool called node.js. So node.js allows us access to JavaScript, but just in our terminal without having to worry about HTML and CSS. It's actually a really big thing when it happened because HTML, CSS, and JavaScript were kind of three musketeers. They were always paired up. There's no way to extract one from the other. And they all lived on what we'd call the front end, or the visual aspect of our web applications. And so being able to pull JavaScript out of that was pretty powerful and allowed us to play around with JavaScript on our own machines in a very different way. So bringing that all back to today. So the last three things we just looked at in terms of alert, prompt, and confirm, those are all browser-based. For the front end, that'll be in regular JavaScript. When we're working in the terminal, we're going to have to use different tools to access that because we don't have a dialog box that can pop up in our terminal. Maybe it would be helpful too for me just to pull up a terminal as well. So in Codio, it kind of all looks the same, which is nice because it means you all get to work sort of in the same spot. But to be clear, a terminal should look a little bit different when you're actually working with it. Apologies. Of course, I'm opening this and wants to install 13 things. This is a joy of working with computers. All right, so let me pull this over here. So this is my actual terminal that I'm working with on my machine. You all will have access to a terminal, whether you're working on a Mac or a PC, depending on what you have. So in the terminal here is where I can actually pull this up a little bit. Here's where we can actually type in different commands and work from my machine to influence what's happening on my machine in some way. So we can print out all the files in here. Let's see, I'm trying to think of anything else interesting we do. I can type what directory I'm in. This is, as normal developers, you'll end up spending a lot of time in the terminal as well. And I can run JavaScript from here, which used to not be the case. So again, in Codio, you'll see terminal as usually this pane on the right-hand side. All right, so let's talk about how to use prompt sync up here. So I'm gonna talk a tiny bit about libraries, not too much, just because we're just gonna be using this line, so I wouldn't stress too much about it just yet. When someone talks about a JavaScript library, sometimes they'll be talking about like a JavaScript plugin, perhaps, or package. What we're talking about is some external chunk of code that we can pull down, that we can get access to, and we're going to use that code to do something. In this case, there's a library called prompt sync. Excuse me. And this prompt sync library is going to give us access to a prompt function that is going to be very similar to what we use in the browser. It'll just be used in the library. There's some interesting details about how this gets pulled in, requires a keyword that Node gives us access to pull in libraries. But again, in general, we can kind of just leave this as is and know if we want to use prompts within the terminal, we need to have this line here. If we don't have it, it's not going to work. So let's take a look at how prompt sync works. So I'm going to copy this over here. Excellent. Okay, so we have some new code here. It should look very similar to what we were looking at before, right? In terms of the browser, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here and hit run code. And if we notice on the right-hand side, instead of seeing one of those dialog pop-ups, we're instead seeing a couple things. First of all, this should look pretty familiar, right? We've seen this a few times when we've hit run code. We're running Node, which we just talked about. Node is our way of running JavaScript in our terminals. Hopefully that's starting to gel together a little bit. And then we're running script1.js. That is our JavaScript file. You can see up here. So it runs that JavaScript file. Then we get this prompt. What's your name? You'll see this little cursor here. Here's where I can type in and I'll hit enter. And we're getting that output back and are able to do something with that output. So real quick, everyone just make sure you can run this bit of code. So again, how I pulled that over was just under this first heading here. I copied that over, pasted it, and then scroll down to the bottom and hit run code. If that's working for you as intended, just go ahead and give me a thumbs up in the chat. Just want to make sure things are working for folks before we move too far ahead. All right, how's it going for folks? Folks able to run that? Any errors that popped up? Excellent. Thanks for the thumbs up, Timo. Thanks, Omar. Appreciate it. Also, I should just say, if I'm mispronouncing your name, please let me know. You can just message me individually, or make a sad face on camera, whatever works. But I want to do my best. All right, we're seeing some thumbs up. It's coming in. Excellent. So as y'all can see, I mean, maybe this feels small to y'all. It's like, great, I can type something in and we can access it. This is actually a pretty big game changer from what we've been doing before with JavaScript. Last week, we really had to sort of set up what we wanted to do and just go one by one down each line of code, evaluate it, and that was all our programs to do. Now we can actually really work with user input to do something interesting with it. So pretty exciting. Excellent. All right, glad it's working for you all. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and copy over this next bit here and paste in here. So here we have a new prompt. What is your favorite color? Notice I still have this other prompt up here. So I'm going to go ahead and clear what's up here, and then let's run this code. All right, so what is your name? Go ahead and type that in. Hello us, what is your favorite color? All right, excellent. My favorite color lately has been orange. I like an orange. All right, your favorite color is orange. So a couple interesting things here. One, we're seeing that, of course, getting another example of using prompt. We're also seeing that prompt can be used multiple times in the same JavaScript file to continue to pull out data from the user, right? So now it's sort of a bit like a menu, right? It's asking us different questions. And as a user, we can type in the correct prompt and hopefully get out something interesting from it. Let's complicate this a tiny bit before we get on to, actually, let's do this next bit, sorry. I'll do something interesting in a second. All right, so let's do this next little prompt. I'll go ahead and run this as an example over here. So we got, what is your name? What's your favorite color? How old are you? Goodness gracious, all right. And we can see here, we're getting our age, just plugging that back in, and it's telling us what the data type is of that value. So let's talk through this a bit. So the data type that's coming back from prompt, notice I did type in a number. I typed in 36. And when it got printed out, looked good, looked cool, right? But the data type of that is string. So the purpose here, the point here of this little example is that no matter what a user types in, it's always coming back as a string, no matter what. All right, so any user input is always going to be a string. That'll also be true for the dialog prompts we saw that were just in JavaScript as well. Let's go into this last example here, just so you can see. So to really confirm and nail that idea, all right, let's take this out. right here, so I'm entering this part of the prompt. I'm going to enter a first number, let's say 9. I'm going to enter a second number, let's say 1. You can see here the sum is 91. Now that's not right, right? So if we look at our expression right here in terms of number 1 plus number 2, that seems correct. That's what we talked about last week. This should be regular addition. But because number 1 and number 2 are strings, they're getting concatenated instead of added, right? So that's what we're seeing here, is they're getting concatenated instead of added. So again, just to sort of drive home, we really do want to make sure that we know any data that's going to get inputted is getting inputted as a string. And so our next section is going to be talking about how to convert data types and move, strings to numbers, things like that. Before we move on, though, I'm going to cut this out right here, so we now have a little bit shorter of a prompt. Okay, so we have access to this username that's within here, right? What I want to ask you all is, how do we update this prompt? So instead of just saying, what is your favorite color? We can instead say, for example, for me, it would say, Wes, what is your favorite color? How can we use the information from that first prompt to inform what our second prompt looks like? Go ahead and take a second and try it out on your own, just to connect those two prompts. And then we'll come back together and chat about it. Give y'all, say 45 seconds or so, maybe a minute. So again, we want to use the username from this first prompt and adjust this second prompt to use that name as well. All right, y'all, take another 25, 30 seconds or so. Give it a shot. All right, excellent. Thanks, Omar. All right, so there's a couple different ways we can do this, right? So we have access to that string within username up here, and we use it, console log username, yada, yada. Let's talk about how we can modify this string. So a couple different ways we could do this. First of all, we could say something like username plus, and then sort of account for that string to be in there. So I'm updating this second string inside of here to say, comma, what is your favorite color? And then we'll get the prompt from the get the prompt value, and then we can use that as part of the next console log. So let's go ahead and run that and take a look. So type in Wes. Hello, Wes. Wes, what is your favorite color? Right, so we can use that value here. Excellent. Another way we could do it, of course, is to use string interpolation and use template strings with backticks. I know some of you all said this was not your favorite, but I'm going to tell you, you're just going to have to suck it up, get used to it. So it's an important part of it. So in this case, with using a template literal, we can use our slightly complicated little string interpolation bit. We use $, little curly braces around it, and pass in the username, and then create one string from that. So run this again. Oh dear, what happened here? I'm going to clear this. There we go. And then we can see favorite color. Excellent, right? So we can see this working with both different ways. All right, excellent. Thanks for sharing as well, Tatiana. Appreciate it. All right, nice job, y'all. Cool. So I hope you all are starting to see some of the power of this in terms of building something that's like kind of interactive, kind of fun, where you're actually able to pull in some data from the user. Let's go ahead and move ahead to our next session where we're going to talk about conversion between different data types. And that'll help us change from just using strings to actually being able to do something a bit more interesting depending on the value that comes in. All right, so type conversion in JavaScript, that's what we're talking about, is the process of changing data from one type to another, such as turning a string into a number or vice versa. This is often necessary when you receive input as one data type. Again, it's going to be a string, but require another for correct processing. There are two types of type conversion. One is implicit conversion. The JavaScript automatically converts types behind the scenes. This often happens when expressions involving binary operators or operands of different types are involved. So this statement, I think, is actually a little bit wrong here. So what's happening here is we're setting a result variable equal to 3, the string 3, plus 2, the number 2. So it says 3 here, but 2 implicitly converts to a string. This number 2 converts to a string, and the result is the string 32. Right, so this is a result of us joining together, concatenating two different data types into the same one. And in this case, how JavaScript will usually handle this is by turning it into a string. Something like explicit conversion is when the developer is saying, hey, I know this is going to be a different data type, and I'm going to do something to actually account for it and transition it to a new data type. So we have a number of different, too many really at this point, different functions we can use that are built into JavaScript. These will be applicable in both browser-based JavaScript as well as anything happening in the terminal, so both environments. And we'll be able to use these functions to transition between different data types. So the example we have here is there's a function called number with a capital N, number. Passing a string value into there will attempt to convert that value to an actual number. Pretty useful, just says number. I like that. So understanding type conversion is essential because it helps prevent bugs and ensures that operations on variables yield the correct results. So for example, adding those two numbers. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit more about sort of how to use these methods. I'll give you a sort of more solid foundation on data types and things like that. All right, so let's talk about our first situation that we want to work through, which is converting strings to numbers. This is exactly what we were just talking about, right? So we can convert string to numbers in a number of different ways, and we'll talk about all of them, and I'll talk to you about sort of what I think is probably the easiest, maybe best way to move forward. So we have a couple. We have what we just saw, which is number with a capital N, parentheses. You put your string number inside of there, and it'll convert it to a number. The unary plus operator is a quick shorthand. You're going to put a plus in front of a string that is representative of a number, and it'll attempt to convert it into a number. And then we have two functions here, one called parse int, one called parse float. Parse int will always try and transform something into an integer, so it's like a whole number. And then parse float will try and keep any of those decimals from a string representation of a number as well. So let's talk through those. I think talking about them abstractly is a little difficult. All right, so just to set up our environment here. So again, we have our prompt sync library up here assigned to prompt. That means we have access to prompt. Let's go ahead and first, before we actually play around with prompt here, we're just going to play around with the different functions that we just talked about. So I'm going to copy over parse int over here. Ooh, let's go ahead and enter that down. Okay, cool. Make a little bit of space here so we can see everything. So I'll go ahead and run this code, and then let's talk about the output here. So when we run this code, we see the output that comes out is after adding, the total quantity is 6. So let's see how we got there. So over here we have string quantity, string representation of some quantity, is the number 4, but as a string, right? We see those double quotes. And then we have a new variable here called additional quantity, with which is represented by an actual numeric value of 2. We then define a new variable called total quantity, where we want to add these two values together. In this first example, we're using parse int, and we're passing in the string quantity into that. This is going to allow that string 4 to be counted as a number 4 when we actually add those values. So 4 plus 2 is 6, and that's how we end up with our console log statement appropriately showing what the total quantity is. Let's fuss around with this a little bit. So first of all, just to be hyper clear, if we exclude the parse int from here, if we just try and add these two values and we run this code, we get the value 42 because remember, We have a string, we have a number, it's trying to coerce, it's trying to transform both those values into one type, which is a string. So we do indeed want to keep that parse int. Where this is important, it's pretty rare that you would personally define these two values as something different, but this could be a place where we would use prompt. So maybe our prompt is something like, what is the current quantity? Something like that. Go ahead and clear this. Now if we run this code, let's say it's 99. Now we're appropriately adding that 2 to the value we put in versus before where we would expect to see 992, right? Because we were just adding it to a string. In this case, we are indeed converting it instead. Pretty powerful, not bad. All right, I want you all go ahead and just give this a shot transforming the string to a prompt. Make sure it works for you as well. And then just give me a thumbs up when you are done with that. Just want to make sure that you all are getting the same output as I am. So again, just go ahead and copy over that first block of code, and we're going to change string quantity to a prompt like this. You can ask whatever question you like. We're hoping to enter in a number. Right, excellent, y'all. Once you got something working, go ahead and just give me a thumbs up in chat. All right, excellent. Thank you, Joseph. Appreciate it. Thank you. I'm going with Sergem, but let me know if I've gotten that name wrong. Thank you, Timo. Thank you, sorry. All right, excellent. Seems like folks are moving through with it. A very exciting thumbs up from Omar. All right, cool. So yeah, so again, pretty powerful. I know maybe it feels like very small. This is giving us access to user data coming in, which is huge, right? So it's a big deal. All right, let's take a look at some of the couple other methods that we talked about. Sorry, a couple other functions that we talked about. We can run through those pretty quickly, and then let's talk about kind of which one to use overall. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out this code for the next example. You're welcome to keep all of them, whatever works best and doesn't cause too many errors or anything like that. So let's look at this next example here. So our next example, we have here string temperature, 36.6, temperature rise, 1.1. And then we can see we're using parse float here instead. So parse float is going to take it's called like a floating point or something like that. It's whenever you're using a decimal, you may hear it referred to as a float in sort of technical parlance. So parse float will take in that string, it'll convert it to a numeric value, and then go ahead and add that temperature rise. So let's run it. Cool. We see this is hot. This is spicy hot for sure. So in this case, right, we're using parse float correctly. If we do parse int here, and run it, you'll notice we lose the 0.6 that would have come in when we use parse float. So it does indeed work as expected. It's going to convert those decimal values. If you use parse int instead, they'll just take the integer value of it. All right, pretty straightforward. Let's take a look at the unary plus operator. Sounds fancy, right? It sounds like that's how you make the big money, is using unary plus operators. All right, so over here, very similar example we're looking at. We got string to convert is 50, discount is 10. For this, you put a little plus directly in front of and attached to that variable name. And that's going to convert that value into a number. And so you'll see it does indeed work. So we have 50 minus 10. It changes it from that string to a number. So very brief, kind of neat. You can just plus right in front of there. And that'll transform it. And then let's take a look at our old standby. We got number. Number will work with both like decimal points and with whole numbers as well. So if we transform this, you can see we have 7.48 and 2.52. 7.48 is a string, 2.52 is a number. The number will transform that string into a numeric value, and then we get to add those together and then print it out. Excellent. So a few different options of how to do that. Here's my advice. Well, first of all, any of these will work as you've seen, depending on what the situation is. So if you have a strong preference for one, you of course can always go for that. I think numbers are probably going to be the clearest to me in terms of readability, understanding what we're trying to do. The unary operator looks very cool to me. It feels very like hacker. It's like, oh, nice, there's special symbols, but this is difficult to read. If, for example, we were trying to do something like this starts to look a little wild, right? This should work. We should be able to add these numbers, but having sort of what feels like kind of like magic symbols, kind of pluses in random places, I think it doesn't read very good. It requires a deep knowledge of JavaScript. So again, feels kind of cool, I think, but I would stick with whatever's going to be most explicit. And number, I think, is a good catch-all for that, and will convert all the different types. But lots of ways to do the same thing, kind of whatever works for y'all. All right, I've been talking for a bit. Any questions on this or anything else we've talked about so far? Hopefully it's been pretty straightforward. Not too bad, but let me know if y'all have any questions about any of this. All right. Seems silence, folks feeling good. Or just napping. Hey, if you're napping and listening to some dulcet tones, if you're C1 instructor, I guess more power to you, but bring it back. All good. All right, let's keep it moving. So we talked about converting strings to numbers. I'll tell you all, I think that's going to be one of the most important transition points for us to learn. So this is pretty crucial. Next, so we can talk about converting numbers to strings. So in JavaScript, converting numbers to strings is an essential operation, especially when you need to display numeric values as part of text, concatenate numbers, something like that. And there's a few different ways to do this as well. So we have a very nice corollary here to number. We have string, right? We can wrap that around some values. It'll turn into a string. We have .toString. This is what's called a method that could be called on a number, and that'll transform it into a string. We can just concatenate a number with an empty string. That'll do that coercion that we saw from before. And then, of course, we can use template literals. This feels like a little, bring like a sledgehammer to try and plug in a nail, but this will indeed also convert a number to a string. So we will dive into a couple of examples here in this next section. So Omar asked question, parse float rounds the number to the integer. So I don't think it actually rounds. Does this have access to node in here? Yeah, okay. So let's actually take a look at that. So we say 37.9, and then let's do parse float in here. Oh, sorry. I think you're maybe asking parse integer. Maybe that's what you meant. So Omar, let me know if this is answering your question. ParseInt is just taking the integer value. It's not doing anything around rounding at all. Parsefloat will indeed accept any decimal points and do its best to get you the exact value that is within there. Hopefully that helps there. All right, cool. So let's talk about a string here. So first example here, we got a string. We're very familiar. Put this down so we can see. All right, so our example here, we got a number, we have string. We want to transform this number into a string. We're going to go ahead and just use the string function, capital S, place that number inside of those parentheses, and then we end up with a string. We can see we've added this together to number as a string, 1, 2, 3. It's a little hard to tell here. We could also say something like, if we really want to check, you can do type of string, and we can see indeed it comes out as a string. Not too bad. All right, with this next one, let's take a look at this one. So we have here temperature string. I'm mostly just going to show these as examples because they're pretty straightforward, but if y'all have any questions, please do just jump in and ask. So we can see here we have this numeric stored as a variable, and with that variable, we can call .toString on that. That'll transform that as well into a string. We can add that in here. Concatenating, this is, I feel like this was the way to do it, like, I don't know, 5 years ago. I know people still do this now too, but I feel like I remember seeing a lot of this when I was first learning to code. So if you want to transform a number or anything into a string, you can just sort of add it to this empty string right here. This does that kind of type coercion that we saw earlier, where we have like the string version of 3 plus the number 2. This is kind of the same thing here, where it's just transforming it by default into a string. And then, of course, we have our template literal with all the fun symbols that you never use in your daily life, all in the same place. So that's another option there as well. Yeah, I think template literals, particularly if you're trying to build a large string, are very useful. For a situation like this, you can see we have a lot of options. I would say, to me, this again is going to be probably the most clear. Just capital S string, converting it, to me, that feels very clear as to what's happening. More than anything, though, it's probably most important to be consistent. Great. Any questions on this? I can go ahead and run this code. You can see these are indeed printing out. Right. Let's talk about some slightly odder stuff. Yes, we're doing good here. Excellent on time. So in terms of converting Booleans to numbers, remember Booleans data type as well. We have 2 values for Booleans, true and false. And something that can be useful to do is actually convert between numbers and Booleans. So in JavaScript, converting Booleans to numbers is a straightforward but important operation, especially when you need to perform arithmetic calculations with Boolean values or store them in some kind of numeric format. This can happen sometimes. We'll learn about this way later, but sometimes with databases, true and false can be stored as 0 or 1. And there's some other situations where it is sometimes useful to be able to have some kind of numeric representation of Booleans. So the most common way to convert Booleans to numbers in JavaScript is by using the unary plus operator or the number function. So both of those will work just like they did with strings. The unary plus operator converts true to number 1 and false to 0. And the number function does the exact same thing. It converts true to the number 1 and false to the number 0. You don't notice anything about, so like 1 and 0, does that remind anyone of anything? Ones and zeros, converting Booleans, 1 and 0. Does that feel familiar at all? Yeah. Yeah, so this is we're not gonna talk about binary, no worries. We won't teach a new counting system in any way. But this is, a little touch point here for where binary comes from, of having true or on being represented by 1 and false or off being represented by 0. So if that helps, that's one way to remember what true and false are going to get evaluated to. All right, well, we'll move on to the examples here. I plug in this code here, take a look at these examples and talk through them. I'm just going to pop them all in here. Slide that over, run some code. All right, excellent. All right, so 3 examples here. Our first one, we have let is subscribed equals true. And we're going to use that unary plus operator to go ahead and transform it by putting the plus in front of is subscribed. So if it's true, that'll change it into a 1 as we see here. And then we can print out subscribed as a number, subscribed number. Remember as well, we can of course concatenate these strings. We could also use commas within our const.log statements, and that'll have the output show something a little bit different, which makes it really clear that it is indeed a different data type than just a string. All right, this next example has access false. You can see here we're using number, that capital N number, to translate that. And we can see indeed it is turning false into a 0. This last example here, so we have is premium user true, and then we have two other variables. Base price is 10, and premium discount is 2. And then we have this equation right here. Thankfully, using some parentheses, right, to help clear this up, we have the final output as 8. Can anyone describe why that is? What they think is happening here? We actually don't see a plus or a number here, right? The number capital N. So we don't see those conversions, those explicit conversions happening. How is this working? What do you all think? Maybe a second to read through, think about it, and then we'll discuss. Just as additional information, I'll type in false here. So we'll see what happens with the alternative case. We have it as false. It shows up as 10. I see that several people are typing. I love it. Thank you. Yeah, excellent. Appreciate the answers coming in. Right. Well done, y'all. Appreciate it. And thank y'all too for typing it out. I know sometimes it can feel like, well, he'll just say it in a second. But it's good. It's good to try and get your brain working and try and figure out how you would explain it as opposed to just waiting for me to do it. So much appreciated. So as some of your fellows have been sharing here, so in this case, is premium user is treated, because we're using that multiplication, it's treated as a number, right? So in this case, as opposed to that type conversion, we're being really explicit. JavaScript is trying to kind of figure out what we mean. It's trying to coerce that Boolean value into a number for us to use. So if is premium user is the Boolean value true, that's treated as 1. In this case, 1 times whatever the premium discount is just gives us that premium discount. So that means when we subtract it, we're getting that full value. In the case of false, because false is 0, we then say 0 times, in this case, 2. 0 times 2 is 0. So we end up with base price 10 minus 0. So we keep that base price. So this is pretty clever, I think, a very clever way to write out, to be able to apply this kind of discount without having to, I don't know, do too much type conversion explicitly. I will say, even in this situation, excuse me, even though it works, I would still press y'all to just try and be explicit, even more than anything else. I do think being more explicit, particularly early on, is really useful to make sure you all know exactly what you're looking at. But it is a really clever usage of this. So I would say it's nice and elegant, but it's needed, requires a bit of knowledge of how JavaScript works. All right, not bad. Not bad at all. All right, let's cruise through our next couple sections here, and then we'll be taking a break. All right, so if we need to convert numbers to some kind of Boolean, we can do that as well. The general rule is we're going to convert, when we're converting a number, numbers to Booleans in JavaScript, 0 is going to convert to false. Everything else is going to convert to true. So if it's 0, it'll be false. If it's anything else, it'll go ahead and be true. This conversion can be achieved by using the Boolean constructor or by applying logical operators like not, logical not twice. So I'll talk about that in just one moment here. But as you can see, we also have a Boolean operator here that will explicitly transform any value into a Boolean. So let's take a look at that. Yeah. Okay, all right, let's just go through this first example here first. All right, so this one, enter down these comments so everyone can see. All right, so take a look here. So we have two variables here. We have 0 and non-zero. The aptly name for 0, we have the numeric value 0 inside. For non-zero, we have the value 5. So then we have two new variables, Boolean 0. Oh gosh, it's going to be tough to say. Boolean 0 and Boolean non-zero. We then are using that Boolean function to wrap around those previous values and convert them. Again, this is the same as doing something like this, right? We're using different variables to define each step of the process. Let's go ahead and run this so we can take a look. So just to confirm what we just talked about, right? In the case of the value, the numeric value 0, we transform that into a Boolean, we do get the value false. In the case of a non-zero value as a Boolean, we will get back true. And again, that will work for any kind of Boolean value, even something, any kind of non-zero value that will work even like for negatives, we'll still get true from that. So this is a really explicit conversion of how this works. I mean, pretty straightforward overall. Let's look at some less straightforward ways of doing this. Let's clear this up. Okay. Oof. Let's clear this out. Let's run it. Okay, let's talk about what's happening here. So the output we're getting is that in both situations, the Boolean values convert to true. Just to confirm what we just talked about, this is what we should expect, right? If it's negative or it's positive, as long as it's non-zero, we should get true. If I do another one of these, so let's say 0 number, let's say equal to 0, and then we'll create a new variable here, Boolean 0 equals, we'll use that double exclamation point to perform it on a 0 number. And then let's console log out 0 number as Boolean. And go ahead and do Boolean 0. Run some code. You can see again as expected. All right. So the question is, what's going on with this? What's happening here? So I am going to go ahead and open up a node terminal. We have a bit of time. I think this is not too bad. You all can follow along here as well. So let me just show you the node terminal. When you are working in this space in Codio where you have an actual terminal, you should be able to type in node. And you can see we get a little bit of output here. It says, welcome to node.js. Type .help for more information. Well, that's helpful. Let's just see what that does. Oh, cool. All right. So we get some commands that we can actually type in here. This is giving us access to what's called a REPL, read, evaluate, print, and loop. It's basically a way to run some code and get some output from it immediately. I like using this sometimes. This is where I would work by default to like try something out in JavaScript. The console, the browser console, is also a good place to try that out. If you ever want to exit, as you can see here, you can do Control D to get out, or you can type .exit, and that should get you back to that prompt, the workspace. So two different views we're looking at here. We have workspace. This is sort of like our regular terminal. And if we type node, we're inside of here and actually playing around with the node console itself, where we can type JavaScript. So let me go ahead and just type out a few values here, and we can try and figure out what the not operator does. So if I type out true here, we can see just like in the browser console, right? We can see there's a little evaluation that's happening down here. So as soon as I hit enter, what it's printing out is the value true. So if I do exclamation point true, notice what's coming out the other end. That's false. If I do 2 exclamation points, I get true. All right, what do y'all think? If I do 3 exclamation points and true, what do you think is going to happen? What's the guess? There's only 2 options, so guessing's great. you have a high chance of getting it right. All right, we already have true and false. Any other pluses or minuses? Any emoji reacts to either of those? So I'm going to do 3 different exclamation points and put in the value true here. Excellent. Yes. Trolls, indeed. What if we just came up with an entirely new value? Just broke JavaScript. I love it. All right, so let's try it out. We're getting false. Okay, so what is going on? What is this weird symbol? So what the exclamation point is, this is called the not logical operator. And that word not is really useful. And I want you all to think about that word not when we're using it. We use an exclamation point, we are flipping the Boolean value. What it does is it flips it. So if I say not true, what's not true? Well, it's false, right? That makes sense. What's not true? Oh man, I'm getting tongue twisters, right? If it's not true, we're getting back to true. So each time we use the exclamation point, we're just flipping the value over and over. You can think of it kind of like a little coin flip, right? We're just flipping over to whatever the other value is. Let's bring it back to what we were talking about with our numbers. Now remember, 0 is, we haven't used this term yet, so I'm trying to avoid it. 0 when converted to a Boolean will be a false value. We could describe that as a falsy value. So if we wrap Boolean around the value 0, get this a tiny bit bigger here, we can see we do indeed get false, right? If I do not 0, that not is going to do two things. It's going to convert the value, that integer, to a Boolean value, and it's going to flip it. So it's doing two things at once, right? It's converting and flipping at the same time. That's why if we do two nots, not whatever this integer value is, this numeric value is, it's going to convert it to a Boolean, flip it, and then flip it back to its original Boolean value. It's tricky. It's quite weird, but it does work pretty elegantly, I would say, as well. So again, the exclamation point is doing two things. If it needs to, it's going to convert the value that follows it into a Boolean value, and it's flipping whatever that Boolean value is to its opposite side. So if you ever want to know whether a value is going to be considered true or false, you can just put two exclamation points inside of it. So that's going to convert, flip, and then flip back. So let's try that with actually a couple other values here. So if I do not 10, as we saw over here, right? That's giving true, because that number 10 is a truthy value. If we use Boolean on it, it would return the Boolean value true. Same thing for numbers. This is looking wild, right? This is where you feel like you're coding, where it just feels like you're just sort of smashing the keyboard and something's coming out. What do y'all think with an empty string? Let's just go wild. If I put not in front of this, what do y'all think? Or two nots. So in this case, an empty string is actually what we call a falsy value. There's nothing inside of it, is considered false. How we know that is we have the two exclamation points. So we're doing not this empty string. That's going to convert the value, flip it, and flip it back. What do you think about this? Do you think this is a truthy or falsy value? This is an empty string. There's also a little space in it. All right, we got some ideas coming in. Folks are saying true. I'm positive on true. Let's take a look. Yeah, in this case, you're right? So a string that has anything inside of it, even if it, to our eyes, looks empty, right? That's going to be a truthy value. I'll stop here. There's more we can play around with to check the truthiness and falseness, all kinds of values. I want to say next week, we'll go over more of this and how we can actually use this to a bit more impact. But just to be clear, that's what the exclamation point is doing. Again, it does two things. It converts to Boolean and flips. And so the reason why this code over here works, let me go ahead and get out of here. Let's clear this out. Just rerun this to get back to our original example. The reason this code over here works is because we are taking -10 or 10, converting it to Boolean, flipping it to its opposite Boolean value, and then flipping it back. So that is how this one works. I know it feels like a bit of a tangent. We'll actually see that not become quite important in some future lessons. So for right now, if it's feeling confusing, let it percolate. And then next week when we really have to use it, hopefully we'll be able to bring it back up and feel a bit more comfortable with it. All right, excuse me. Sorry, I gotta make this a little smaller so I can see what else I need to pull over here. All right, let's look at this next example, just a couple more, and then we will take a break. this one a little bigger. In this example, it's going to show something a little new here. Again, I think we'll talk about more of this moving forward. We have this new little symbol here. What is this? What does this mean, y'all? What are we talking about? This little bracket. What do y'all think? Yeah, right. I think when I was teaching the last C1 course, I was asking folks how they remembered this, and everyone's talking about being taught alligators are always being the larger number. Does that resonate, or is that like an American thing? Is that just us over here learning about alligators? It feels very Florida to me, so it checks out. But either way, whatever that opening part is pointing towards, that's going to be a larger number. So this is doing a conversion here. So if the quantity is 0, if the quantity is greater than 0, we're converting this to a Boolean value. We're going to get true. So for example, I said 10 in here. Is the item available true? Otherwise, if it's 0 or less than 0 somehow, we'll go ahead and get false. So we're going to learn a few others of these as well moving forward. And then just another example here of how you might end up using this. This actually is like quite common and quite useful. Here, imagine we're building some kind of shopping application. We have 3 items in cart, and we just want to know at some point, hey, does the user have any items in the cart? In this case, if we run this code, we can say, yeah, they do have some items in the cart because it's a positive value, right? Or it's a value that's non-zero. That's really what I should say. In the event that this comes back as 0, we can see that, nope, there's no items in the cart. So maybe then on our website or web application, we want to do something with that information, right? So there are indeed some real world examples where we do some of these conversions. All right, this is a longer slide here, but I think we talked about some interesting stuff. We talked about converting numbers to Booleans. And then we also talked a little bit about this not logical operator. All right, that is bringing us to our break. Been doing a lot of chatting. Hopefully it hasn't totally washed over you. Let's go ahead and take a break. I think 10 minutes sounds great. And we will come back. I think C1 staff, I think before we talked about putting up like a quiz or something, if there's a quiz or not quiz, a poll. You know what I mean. You're on it. Let's put up one of those, see how folks are feeling about things. And of course, if you have any questions over the break, just post them in chat and we can chat about it before we move on to the lab. I will see you all in just a little bit. Thanks for the music. Thanks for turning on the recording. All right, everyone have a nice break. Anyone do anything nice for themselves in the last 10 minutes? Stretch it all, get some water. Yeah, just blank staring at the screen. Just some quiet contemplation. All right, I'll assume so. Excellent. Well, welcome back. Let me go ahead and do a bit of a lab preview. Let's talk about what we're going to do in the lab. We have plenty of time today. I feel like we'll probably end before 30 minutes after, but we'll see where you all get to. There's definitely some tricky parts here. It does sound like most folks wanted us to continue. If there is anything that you all have questions about the content we talked about today or earlier, you can, of course, just add it to the chat as you all are working on the project, and I'll try and get to it either in chat or if it feels like something applicable to everyone, I'll bring it up on stream. All right, make sure we have everything correct right here. Okay, all right, so for today's lab, we're going to be building some kind of custom calculator. And we'll have an example of this in just one second. We're going to use JavaScript. We're going to use that prompt sync library. And the goal is to have something that utilizes user input, arithmetic operations, and data parsing to create a functional tool that performs calculations based on that user input. So you have lots of options of what you can choose between. Some examples could be something like a recipe ingredient converter. Remember, we did that earlier on, to something like a budget planner. Focus will be on accurately capturing user input, executing the necessary calculations, and presenting the results clearly. All right, so let's look at an example. So this is an example of like budget savings calculator that's going to take in some user input and then do some kind of calculations to show details to the user. So let's go ahead and run it. All right, so the first question up here, sorry, I'll expand this a little bit. So what is your savings goal? Oh, I think I messed this up by zooming it in. Sorry, one sec. All right, there you go. All right, so what's our savings goal? So this is first asking us, right, probably via prompt, a title for something. So let's say I want to have a new goal of being able to buy, oh, it's too big. It's freaking out. All right, here we go. A new computer. All right, so how much do I already have saved for it? Let's say I have 350 saved for it. How much do you need in total for your new computer? Oof, depends on how nice of a computer I want, right? That could be a wide range. Let's say like 2,200, I think for like a fancy new Mac. That's, that's getting up there. How many months do you have to reach your goal? We'll say 12. I think my current computer could hold on for one more year, but after that, I think the fan's gonna send it off into space. So we'll have to plan for the next year. Go ahead and hit enter, and then the program here is going to go ahead and plug together this user information to put together a plan for me, right? So we can see here it's said to reach your new computer of $2,200 in 12 months, you'll need to save this much per week, every 2 weeks, or every month. So some calculations are happening afterwards, accounting for the money I already have saved in here. So it's pretty neat. This allows us to build something that's interactive, uses JavaScript, and allows us to take that user input and do something interesting with it. So that's the plan of what you are going to build. To build something like this, that's a budget calculator, but again, you can build something that's like a recipe tracker, it could be a trip planner, anything you want that's going to take in user input and output some sort of process for some sort of result for the user. A couple things to keep in mind, just as you are planning this out and starting to build and try a few things out. First of all, right now, we don't have a lot of ways to handle incorrect user input. That is something we're going to do later on. We're going to be able to handle if the user puts in something that we don't want. But so keep in mind as you're testing this out, sort of planning it out, assume that the user is doing their best to follow the instructions and do everything correct. Yeah, and then there's not too many branching ideas of what someone can do. So keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind just as you are testing out, if you're testing that with the prompt, you may actually find that it's a bit slow because every time you're having to run through the prompts again, you may want to hard code some of the values of the prompts, figure out what the overall sort of algorithm is that you're building, and then work backwards to add back in those prompts. So those are just a couple tips in terms of how to get started. But again, you'll have lots of leeway here to build something that's hopefully pretty creative and a little bit fun as well. All right, so this is the page we'll be working on here. And it says here, create an interactive JavaScript program that functions as a custom calculator. It should perform a specific calculation based on user input and provide a clear result. Again, that can be any kind of calculator that you want. Just make sure you're using some of these arithmetic values we've talked about. Make sure you're using some parsing of values that can be percent, parse float, number, whatever else, Booleans perhaps, and then make sure to log out the values so the user can see something. We have a few other examples down here. So distance converter, peak calculator, ski size calculator, all kinds of different stuff that could work for this. Before we get started, any questions about this task? Any questions about what you're being asked to do, what the end goal looks like? All right. Seems okay. So in that case, you'll have some time to work on this. In just a minute, we'll move over to projects. We can probably turn off the recordings. We don't just have 30 minutes of you all staring at my face. So as we move over to that, if you have any questions, please do drop them in the chat. I can answer them. There is the demo that we just looked at. The code is listed here. I really encourage y'all before looking at that, go ahead and try it out on your own first before looking over to find what the solution is. Give it your best shot and kind of struggle with it. That struggle is your brain learning things, so it is good. And yeah, before you sort of short circuit that learning by just taking a look at one of the solutions. So take a few minutes, come up with a theme, and then start to work out how to put together this sort of prompt-based interactive tool. All right, we will I'll check in. I'll say like maybe like 5 or 10 after, just see how folks are doing. But we do have plenty of time, so if folks are still working, that is a-okay. If you get to a good spot, you can just give me a thumbs up in chat. And of course, again, if you have any questions, just post them in chat as well. Good luck, y'all. Hopefully you have some fun with this. All right, thanks, Tatiana. Other folks, what do you think? Any problems come up? Any issues? Maybe what themes are y'all doing? What did you decide for your calculator? Right, Chris, sticking with vacation goals like that. All right, working on a BMI calculator. That's cool. Nice. Sure, Dragos. Josh, if you're comfortable with like if-else statements, then I'm sure you can do more. Just make sure to not skip out on some of the stuff like type conversions and integers and things like that. Yeah, I know it's a little limited since we can't necessarily say, hey, do you want to do this thing or this thing just yet? But don't worry, we'll get there. It'll quickly get more tricky. Right. Well, it sounds like folks are doing okay. So if folks are doing okay, just want more time to work. That is okay. I think we can probably close out here a little bit early. That'll be fine. If any questions do come up, I'll also be checking live chat over, for the rest of today and all that. So if you all have questions, please do feel free to continue with them. Just real quick, just to wrap up what we talked about today. So again, just as a reminder, we talked about, first of all, user input more generally, why and how user input can affect our websites and web applications. We talked about the two different environments for JavaScript just a bit. So we talked about sort of front-end development and working on the front end with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We also talked about Node.js and running JavaScript in our terminal, right? Showed you some examples of that. On the front end side, we talked about alert, confirm, and prompt. Those are functions that were built into the front end that allow you to get user input from users via those little dialog boxes. And then for the terminal, we are using a library called prompt sync that allows us to kind of mirror the prompt intake via the terminal. We also talked about type conversion, talked about transitioning between different types and learned some of the nice methods to do that, like capital N number, capital S string, and capital B Boolean. And also spent a little bit of time talking about the not operator, the exclamation point, also I guess called the bang operator. And we'll talk more about that soon in terms of how to use those conditionals to affect your code overall. So a good place to pause. I hope you all continue to enjoy working on this lab. It's pretty fun. I think once you get to be able to do some of this interactive stuff, don't forget too, you can add like emojis and things to your text. You can, play around with sort of formatting. There's all kinds of fun stuff you can do to continue to make it interesting what y'all are working on. So tomorrow we'll be going over, also a little bit of time going over the module 3 project, trying to remember the numbers here, the sort of like concert website that you all are putting together. If you haven't finished that, you still have some time. So we'll be talking about that a bit, and then I'll be introducing the next project, which will very much be focused on prompting and working with JavaScript. So we'll get more practice with that, and we'll have plenty of time to work on it together a bit, and then I'm sure we'll break a bit once everyone's feeling good. So that's it. Thanks y'all so much. Had a wonderful class with y'all, and enjoy the rest of your evenings. We'll see you tomorrow. Anything else